Normandy, June 6, 1944. The early morning mist clings to the hedgerows. German soldiers crouch behind shattered stone walls, rifles ready, eyes scanning the muddy fields. A tense silence stretches across the countryside, broken only by distant artillery fire and the occasional rumble of approaching Allied trucks. Suddenly, the ground trembles. The metallic growl of engines grows louder. From the haze, Sherman tanks emerge, armored giants rolling relentlessly over fields and through hedgerows. Their 75mm guns pivot with precision, shells punching through obstacles and tearing into German positions. Soldiers freeze, shocked by the sheer speed and coordination of these machines. Panic ripples through the ranks. In a matter of moments, the battlefield is transformed. Traditional defensive tactics crumble under the mobility and firepower of the Shermans. For the German troops, this is a confrontation they were not prepared for, a glimpse of a technological and tactical force that will change the course of the battle and, ultimately, the campaign. By mid-1944, the stage for the largest amphibious invasion in history had been meticulously prepared. The Allies planned Operation Overlord, a decisive push to liberate Western Europe from Nazi control. Months of intelligence, deception, and logistical planning preceded the assault. Beaches were mapped, German defenses analyzed, and landing sequences choreographed with precision. Normandy, with its cliffs, fields, and dense hedgerows, was chosen for its strategic location, despite the formidable obstacles it presented. German forces had fortified the region extensively. Concrete bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, and minefields dotted the coastline. The Wehrmacht relied on experience and entrenched positions, confident that their panzer divisions and coastal artillery would repel any amphibious assault. Yet, their defensive mindset focused largely on static positions. Mobility and rapid armored coordination were underappreciated threats. American Sherman tanks, by contrast, were the result of continuous innovation. Medium tanks with a balance of firepower, armor, and speed, they were designed for versatility. Equipped with 75mm guns and capable of maneuvering through rough terrain, they could support infantry while countering German armored threats. Dozens were staged on landing crafts, ready to disembark onto the beaches and push inland with infantry support. On the eve of D-Day, the tension was palpable. German commanders underestimated the Sherman's role, expecting tanks to be limited in hedgerow country. They anticipated slow progress and believed their fortifications would dictate the pace of battle. Allied planners, however, had studied terrain, weather, and enemy psychology, preparing tanks for rapid deployment behind infantry. When the first waves of Shermans rolled off the landing crafts, their presence would be both literal and psychological. For German troops hiding in hedgerows and behind walls, these armored machines represented not just firepower, but an entirely new way of fighting, a combination of speed, coordination, and shock that would redefine the battlefield. The stage was set. Normandy's hedgerows would soon witness a clash of tactics and technology that would stun the defenders and mark the beginning of a relentless Allied push into occupied France. As dawn broke over Normandy, the intricate coordination of Operation Overlord began to unfold. Allied infantry and airborne divisions moved into position, supported by naval bombardments and airstrikes designed to soften German defenses. Behind this meticulously timed assault were the Sherman tanks, poised to support infantry and engage German armored units. Their speed and firepower were crucial. Unlike earlier campaigns, the Allies sought not just to land troops, but to penetrate deep into enemy territory rapidly. The Sherman tank, though not the heaviest or most powerful on paper, excelled in combined arms operations. Its mobility allowed it to navigate the maze of hedgerows, while the 75mm gun could neutralize enemy fortifications and light armor. Crews were trained to operate in coordination with infantry, artillery, and air support, maximizing both offensive and defensive capabilities. German troops, accustomed to slower engagements and predictable lines, were unprepared for this fluid approach. Communication and reconnaissance played a decisive role. Radio-equipped Shermans could relay battlefield intelligence, calling in artillery or coordinating flanking maneuvers. The tanks could advance through fields and villages that would have stalled heavier German panzers, exploiting gaps and creating breaches in the lines. German commanders faced a dilemma: attempt frontal assaults against agile tanks or risk being outmaneuvered and encircled. The psychological impact of a Shermans cannot be overstated. German infantry, expecting entrenched fortifications to dictate the tempo, found themselves confronted by armored vehicles moving at surprising speed, firing with devastating accuracy. The combination of thunderous engines, steel tracks crushing hedgerows, and cannon fire reshaped their perception of battlefield reality. Confidence wavered, and hesitation replaced decisiveness, a dangerous flaw in the fluid dynamics of Normandy's combat. In these early hours, the Normandy campaign would reveal the strength of combined arms, the adaptability of Sherman crews, and the vulnerability of even experienced German forces when confronted with a new kind of armored warfare. The stage was set for encounters that would stun the defenders and showcase the Shermans' critical role in the liberation of France. The first angle to consider is tactical. Sherman tanks transformed how battles were fought in the hedgerow country of Normandy. Traditional German defensive strategies relied on static positions, trenches, bunkers, and fortified villages. Infantry units expected to repel attacks with heavy machine guns and artillery support. Yet, Sherman crews moved with flexibility, exploiting gaps, coordinating with infantry, and using terrain creatively. Hedgerows, once seen as obstacles, became channels for maneuver. Tanks could climb, flank, and provide suppressive fire, forcing German troops to abandon entrenched positions or face annihilation. Next is the technological angle. Though not as heavily armored as the German Panther or Tiger tanks, Shermans excelled in reliability, speed, and versatility. Their 75mm guns were effective against lighter armor and fortifications. Critically, Shermans could be produced in large numbers, allowing units to replace losses rapidly and maintain offensive momentum. German tanks, while individually superior in firepower, were fewer in number and prone to mechanical issues, particularly in the challenging terrain of Normandy. The mass deployment of Shermans overwhelmed German expectations. The human angle highlights the experiences of soldiers on both sides. Allied tank crews endured constant danger, navigating mines, artillery fire, and ambushes, yet they moved with discipline and coordination. For German soldiers, the sudden appearance of armored forces in unexpected places caused confusion and panic. Accounts from infantrymen described the shock of seeing Shermans crest hedgerows seemingly out of nowhere, their guns trained and ready, altering morale almost instantly. Fear, hesitation, and disorientation often dictated German responses more than tactical calculation. Human and environmental weaknesses. The shock value of the Shermans was amplified by their sheer numbers, reliability, and the seeming inevitability of their presence on the battlefield. The strategic angle considers the broader implications for the Normandy campaign. Shermans enabled sustained momentum, allowing the Allies to penetrate German lines quickly, support infantry advances, and secure critical objectives. Their effectiveness reduced the reliance on slower, artillery-heavy assaults and allowed commanders to adapt in real time. By breaking through hedgerow defenses, Sherman tanks directly contributed to the liberation of key villages, the disruption of panzer counterattacks, and the eventual Allied advance toward Cannes and beyond. Finally, the logistical and industrial angle cannot be overlooked. The United States' capacity to produce and deploy Shermans in significant numbers ensured that even heavy losses could be rapidly replaced, maintaining operational momentum. German forces, in contrast, faced limitations in both quantity and mechanical reliability. Even superior German tanks could not be deployed en masse, and logistical strains restricted their ability to respond effectively. In Normandy, this disparity magnified the Shermans' influence, allowing the Allies to maintain pressure while denying the Germans opportunities to regroup. Through these angles, it becomes clear that the Sherman tank's role extended far beyond its physical presence. It influenced tactics, morale, command decisions, and campaign strategy simultaneously. The Normandy battlefield was not only a test of firepower, but of adaptability, courage, and perception, and Sherman's consistently gave the Allies the upper hand. The decisive moments unfolded in the hedgerow fields of Normandy, where German forces had expected to control the battlefield through prepared defenses. June 6, 1944, marked the beginning of D-Day, but the critical encounters involving Sherman tanks occurred in the days immediately following the landings, as Allied forces pushed inland. German commanders, expecting the hedgerows to slow the Allied advance, were caught off guard when armored columns emerged through narrow corridors, crushing obstacles and creating breaches that infantry could exploit. One pivotal engagement occurred near St. Lo, where a concentrated Sherman advance confronted German infantry in armored positions. Shermans maneuvered through dense hedgerows, their tracks tearing through barriers while gunners targeted bunkers and machine gun nests with precision. German troops, relying on the cover of foliage and fortifications, were forced into exposed positions. The psychological impact was immediate. Hesitation replaced aggression, and local commanders struggled to coordinate counterattacks under fire. At Villers-Bocage, the contrasting capabilities of German and American armor became apparent. While German panzer units were technically superior in firepower, they were fewer in number and often deployed reactively rather than proactively. Shermans moved in combined arms formations, coordinating with infantry and artillery, negating the advantage of superior German tanks. German attempts to flank or ambush were met with rapid response, supported by radio communications and infantry cover, which allowed Shermans to neutralize threats efficiently. The terrain itself, once thought advantageous to defenders, was transformed by the Sherman's mobility. Hedgerows, previously considered natural defensive positions, became obstacles that could be crossed or bypassed. German forces struggled to adapt, and in multiple encounters, their counterattacks faltered under the relentless push of armored and coordinated Allied units. By mid-June, it became evident that the Sherman's combination of firepower, mobility, and tactical integration had changed the dynamic of Normandy combat, stunning German troops and forcing them to reconsider defensive doctrines in real time. By late June 1944, the full impact of Sherman tanks on the Normandy campaign became undeniable. In battles across the Bocage, German panzer divisions found themselves repeatedly outmaneuvered. Sherman crews, operating in coordinated units with infantry and artillery support, exploited every weakness in the hedgerow defenses. Tanks moved along unexpected routes, fired with precision, and created breaches that allowed infantry to advance rapidly, often collapsing entire German defensive positions within hours. One notable confrontation occurred near Corentin, where German forces attempted to hold the town against advancing Allied units. Shermans led the assault, providing suppressive fire while infantry secured the streets. German resistance, relying on entrenched positions and ambushes, was systematically neutralized. The combination of numerical superiority, reliability, and tactical coordination overwhelmed the defenders. Accounts from German soldiers described the disorientation caused by the tanks' unexpected angles of approach and the speed with which they could appear seemingly out of nowhere, cresting hedgerows and firing upon positions that were considered secure. The Battle of St. Lo further illustrated the strategic advantage provided by Shermans. American forces employed tanks to punch through German lines, targeting both armor and fortified positions. The ability to maintain momentum was critical. Where German commanders sought to regroup, Sherman units had already advanced, disrupting reinforcements and communication lines. These engagements revealed a stark contrast in adaptability. While German units often relied on rigid doctrines and predictable tactics, Sherman crews operated with flexibility, responding dynamically to the evolving battlefield. By the end of June, Normandy's countryside bore the unmistakable marks of Sherman dominance. German troops, stunned and demoralized, began to acknowledge the tank's effectiveness, not simply as a weapon, but as a force that reshaped tactical thinking. The Normandy hedgerows, once a defensive asset, had been transformed into corridors for Allied armored power. Sherman tanks had achieved more than battlefield victories. They had altered the psychology, strategy, and momentum of the campaign, setting the stage for the liberation of key towns and the continued advance into occupied France. The Normandy campaign left German forces reeling. The Sherman tanks, initially underestimated, had proved their value in both tactical and psychological terms. German infantry and armored units had suffered heavy losses, their defensive lines fractured, and their command structures disrupted. The rapid mobility of Shermans, coupled with coordinated infantry and artillery support, prevented German forces from regrouping effectively, forcing a gradual retreat across the hedgerows. For the Allies, the effectiveness of Sherman tanks reinforced the value of combined arms doctrine. Infantry units gained confidence knowing that tanks could suppress enemy fire, breach fortified positions, and navigate terrain that previously slowed advances. The tanks became a symbol of reliability and momentum, allowing commanders to push further inland with greater assurance. Each engagement provided lessons in coordination, maneuver, and the integration of technology and human skill. The German perspective highlighted a growing sense of vulnerability. Panzer divisions, though superior in armor and firepower on paper, could not be deployed rapidly enough to counter the infantry and armored units had suffered heavy losses, their defensive lines fractured, and their command structures disrupted. The rapid mobility of Shermans, coupled with coordinated infantry and artillery support, prevented German forces from regrouping effectively, forcing a gradual retreat across the hedgerows. For the Allies, the effectiveness of Sherman tanks reinforced the value of combined arms doctrine. Infantry units gained confidence knowing that tanks could suppress enemy fire, breach fortified positions, and navigate terrain that previously slowed advances. The tanks became a symbol of reliability and momentum, allowing commanders to push further inland with greater assurance. Each engagement provided lessons in coordination, maneuver, and the integration of technology and human skill. The German perspective highlighted a growing sense of vulnerability. Panzer divisions, though superior in armor and firepower on paper, could not be deployed rapidly enough to counter the speed and flexibility of the Sherman-led assaults. Field reports from German officers reveal a mix of frustration and disbelief. Entrenched positions were being neutralized in hours rather than days, and the psychological impact of facing a relentless armored opponent became apparent. Morale suffered as soldiers confronted both the physical threat and the unpredictability of Sherman tactics. The hedgerows, once a defensive advantage, had lost much of their protective value. Sherman tanks demonstrated that obstacles could be overcome with mobility, coordination, and concentrated firepower. German forces were forced to abandon pre-planned strategies, improvising under pressure and often reacting too slowly to prevent breaches. By the end of the first weeks of the Normandy campaign, the tide had clearly shifted. Allied momentum, driven in large part by Sherman tanks, had stunned German troops and set the stage for further advances into occupied France. As July unfolded, the consequences of the Sherman's effectiveness became increasingly evident. The Allied push from the beaches toward key towns like Caen, Saint-Lô, and Corentin proceeded with momentum that German forces struggled to counter. Sherman tanks played a pivotal role in these advances, breaking through defensive positions, supporting infantry assaults, and sustaining pressure on retreating units. Their presence ensured that the Allies maintained operational tempo, preventing German forces from stabilizing front lines or launching effective counterattacks. German commanders recognized the tactical implications. Even where panzer divisions were available, coordination and rapid deployment lagged behind the fluid movements of Sherman-led units. Communication lines were disrupted, defensive positions were overrun, and morale continued to deteriorate. Soldiers reported fear and uncertainty when facing Shermans, often delaying reactions or abandoning positions. The psychological weight of these tanks contributed as much to the German retreat as their physical firepower. From a strategic perspective, Normandy became a proving ground for American armor doctrine. Lessons learned here: rapid deployment, combined arms integration, coordination with infantry and artillery, and flexibility in maneuver shaped subsequent campaigns across France. Sherman tanks became the backbone of U.S. armored divisions, reinforcing the concept that mobility and reliability could offset individual technological disadvantages when deployed en masse. By mid-July, the liberation of critical towns demonstrated the cumulative effect of Sherman operations. German defensive cohesion had been shattered, Allied forces controlled key terrain, and the path toward Paris began to open. The Shermans had not only stunned German troops, they had redefined the pace and character of warfare in Normandy. The campaign illustrated that technological innovation, integrated with disciplined tactics and human courage, could decisively influence the outcome of battle. The story of Sherman tanks at Normandy is more than a tale of armored vehicles on a battlefield. It is a story of adaptability, coordination, and the human capacity to harness technology in the service of strategy. These tanks, neither the heaviest nor the most powerful of their time, demonstrated that reliability, numbers, and tactical integration could overcome even formidable defenses. For German troops, the sudden confrontation with Shermans revealed the limits of static fortifications and the danger of underestimating an enemy's mobility and ingenuity. Hesitation, confusion, and psychological shock became as lethal as the tank's cannons. For Allied forces, Shermans embodied a combination of courage, training, and technological foresight, enabling advances that would shape the liberation of France and the broader trajectory of the war. Normandy stands as a testament to the profound influence of innovation applied with precision and discipline. The Sherman's effectiveness was not merely mechanical. It reshaped tactics, morale, and command decisions. In the broader sweep of history, it exemplifies how adaptability, preparation, and cohesion can turn tools of war into instruments of strategic advantage. As the dust settled over Normandy's hedgerows, the tank's rumble faded, but their impact endured on soldiers' minds, on battlefield doctrine, and on the course of World War II itself.